Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestle News 365. Hope everyone is doing very, very well, having a good Monday. As always, there is a ton of WWE news stories to get into today, so let's kick off with the WWE Draft, because we look to have some information now as to when the WWE Draft is set to take place this year. This is a report from Andrew Zarian of the MatMan podcast. This is breaking in the last 15 minutes or so. I had everything planned for what I was going to talk about in this video, but as is the way with the world of pro wrestling at the moment, something has changed, something has been announced, and that is Andrew Zarian reporting that he is hearing, quote, the WWE Draft is scheduled for August to begin on August 30th and end on September 3rd. Now, this would be Monday, August 30th and Friday, September 3rd. Now, obviously, this would be a bit earlier than what they've done in previous years. In previous years, when it comes to the WWE Draft, they've recently had the drafts take place in October. Of course, they had one in 2019 take place just after SmackDown premiered on Fox. Last year, they had one also around October time when they had their season premieres of SmackDown and Raw. But this year, it's going to be a little bit earlier, and it looks like it's going to fall off the back of SummerSlam, because usually, of course, when it comes to WWE and WrestleMania is the big season finale. The season premiere is the Monday after Raw, the Monday after WrestleMania, the Friday after WrestleMania. Those are the big season premieres. That's when you have stars being called up to the main roster from NXT. That's when you have maybe sometimes even a draft, a superstar shakeup they've had in previous years. That's when you start to reshuffle the roster, but it looks like this is going to change this year, and this has to do with SummerSlam. This has to do the return to touring, so it's going to be very interesting. I don't doubt Andrew Zarian being correct on this one. What I will say is that last year, we had heard that the draft was going to be moved around so many different times, and that was because of the pandemic. This year, given that things are returning to normal, whatever that new normal is, it looks like we're going to have some confirmation as to this soon. When WWE will officially confirm it, we'll have to wait and see. WWE hasn't officially come out and confirmed this as of yet. I don't expect them to, frankly, until we get closer to SummerSlam. Of course, SummerSlam is going to be on August 21st, so we're looking at sort of a 9-day kind of period before WWE does their big reset, or they do their big decision on their big decision on when they want to do this, which people they want to move around, all that kind of stuff. But it makes sense. Look, the whole Performance Center, the Thunderdome era of WWE, it's in some good stuff, let's face it, some good stuff, but the majority of it is bad. And you look at the rosters right now, you look at Monday Night Raw especially, but certainly look at SmackDown with these recent releases. These rosters need to be completely reset. I mean, absolutely completely reset. SmackDown barely has anyone on it right now, whereas Monday Night Raw does have people on it, but their roster is so imbalanced. I mean, so imbalanced at the moment. I've been saying for a while that Finn Balor needs to be called up to Monday Night Raw. The reason I've been saying that for a long period of time is because, frankly, who else does Bobby Lashley have? Who else does Bobby Lashley have to face off as the WWE Champion on Monday Night Raw? Nobody. They're already writing it into the storylines at this point that it's becoming a bit of a running joke that Drew McIntyre is getting all of these rematches. You get a rematch, you get a rematch, you get a rematch. They've been saying it in the storylines because they know it's ridiculous. They know it's ridiculous that Drew McIntyre is getting all of these rematches when he doesn't deserve it. And frankly, they are really, really hurting the Drew McIntyre character, in my opinion, because I think the fans are already, if you're trying to sort of judge this and try and gauge opinion on social media, the fans are already starting to turn a little bit on Drew McIntyre. That's on social media. So as far as what happens when it comes to crowds returning in July, are they going to start turning on Drew McIntyre? Imagine how unfortunate that would be. The majority of the time that this guy spent on top was without crowds, and as soon as crowds return, they start to turn on him. That's not his fault. That's not Drew McIntyre's fault. That's just bad booking. That's bad booking from WWE. So obviously WWE needs a draft. They need a draft because SmackDown barely has any talent. Raw's roster is completely imbalanced, and they need a general reset. And they're looking at this as a general reset. We heard those reports previously that SummerSlam was essentially going to be a big reset for WWE anyway. The plan initially was for WWE to return to touring off the back of SummerSlam. Now, obviously, when AEW made the announcement first that they were going to return to touring in July, WWE decided to move those plans up, and they decided to return to touring in July too. AEW did beat them to the punch, and that's the primary reason there. That's just that they are facts. I know people on social media, WWE stans, would be like, no, that was always the plan. It wasn't. SummerSlam was the plan for their big return to touring. They were going to have this big event event inside the Allegiant Stadium, this big NFL stadium. They were going to sell it out, 70,000 people. Then they were going to go to Raw and SmackDown, returning to the road, fans in attendance. That was their big plan. Plans changed. The reason plans changed was because of AEW. AEW's announcement caused those plans to change, but this draft being lined up as right after SummerSlam does line up with those original plans that WWE looked at SummerSlam as the big reset. Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown, they're getting new sets, probably new graphics, probably new music, and soon new rosters as well, and it's desperately needed. It's getting to this point where, to be honest, I've been watching Raw and SmackDown the last few weeks, and kind of the things I've been saying a couple of times on the reaction streams, and certainly here on the channel, is that you watch this show, and the general consensus is, certainly watching it, of these writers are checked out. They're checked out, or even not necessarily the talent, but certainly the creative on that show is checked out of, let's just get to SummerSlam. Or let's just get to the return to crowds. What we're doing right now doesn't really matter. Let's just get there. We'll have to find something, write something. It doesn't matter. Let's get to live crowds. Let's get to SummerSlam, and let's just start over there. The issue is that WWE does this every year at this point. Every year. We get a draft every year. We get a superstar shakeup every year. And every time we get a draft, every time we get a superstar shakeup, we still get that darn wildcard rule. Every time they're utilizing the wildcard rule. Oh, they're going to be using the wildcard rule. Why? Because the draft doesn't even work. The superstar shakeups don't even work because 2 weeks into that, they realize, actually, we've put people in the wrong place, or we don't have plans for that person, or plans have changed, or we don't have a long-term plan for this person. So, you know, sorry if I don't have a huge amount of optimism for this draft, because we've seen it before. We've seen when WWE tries to do a big reset. They tried it in 2019, season premiere. Raw gets a set, new music. SmackDown premieres on Fox, new set, new music. Obviously, the pandemic changed things, but they tried it again last year. Thunderdome, big reset, new draft, new rosters. We're trying again. Fast forward a year later, or not even a full year later, they're already, okay, we need to do a big reset because the product isn't good. The creative system isn't good. The creative product isn't good. The creative output isn't good. There is something fundamentally wrong here that isn't going to be fixed by sets, by music, by drafts. It's not going to be fixed because there are bigger problems at play here. Now, is a draft going to paper over the cracks? I don't know. I really don't know. It's going to be fascinating to see what this draft consists of. Previously, people were saying, why isn't NXT part of this draft? I would prefer to see a situation where NXT are involved, so that's the NXT talent that does go to Raw and SmackDown. We see some talent from Raw and SmackDown that aren't being used go to NXT. I know previously they couldn't do that because of the COVID situation and the situation at the Performance Center, and the NXT talent was only getting tested twice a week, and there were issues and outbreaks in the Performance Center, so it was easy to keep them separate. I understand that. That makes a lot of sense to me. But what doesn't make sense to me now is why they wouldn't be involved. If you're going to do a reset for Raw and SmackDown, you might as well do one for NXT. They've moved to Tuesday nights, and they need one as well, because something's still missing from that brand too. Something is still missing from that product as well. So I think maybe they change that too. Look, there's certainly a lot they can do and they should do. So maybe the draft is the beginning of this. Who knows? Who knows? We hear this all the time. So fool me once, shame on me, right? That's how the phrase goes. Let's move on. Let's talk about Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell is the next upcoming pay-per-view, of course. So we should be talking about that because it has been revealed who Roman Reigns' opponent for the Universal Championship is going to be at Hell in a Cell. It's being reported by Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer and F4W Online. WWE Universal Champion Roman Reigns will reportedly be defending the Universal Championship against Rey Mysterio at the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view. Now, it was noted, obviously, on Friday's edition of SmackDown that Reigns attacked Mysterio and his son Dominic during the main event for the SmackDown Tag Team Championships against the Usos. I did mention this. I did mention this on the stream, so it hasn't totally taken me by surprise here. I did mention that I could see them going in that direction because of Reigns attacking Rey Mysterio. It's slightly surprising, though, because I look at this and I say, well, the story here, the story that you've been telling and the story that is really dominating SmackDown at the moment doesn't involve Roman Reigns and Rey Mysterio. The story that dominates SmackDown at the moment is Roman Reigns and Jimmy Uso. And for me, the story was there. The story was laid out. They are twins, Jimmy and Jey Uso, so why wouldn't you do the same storyline? George Lucas said it in Star Wars, with the prequels and the original trilogy, it's like poetry, it should rhyme. And it would work with the Usos as well. Have the same story happen to Jey, that happened to Jimmy, that happened to Jey. Why not? That makes total sense. Of course, Jey Uso, he initially didn't fall in line. He didn't acknowledge Roman Reigns. They had the match at Clash of Champions. Roman Reigns won. Then they had the follow-up match, the I Quit match inside of Hell in a Cell at Hell in a Cell last year. And finally, Reigns defeated him by Jimmy Uso getting involved and submitting on, and Reigns choking him out, and Jey Uso had to say, "I quit." But eventually, because of that beating, because of those matches, because of that storyline, Jey Uso eventually fell in line. He became Roman Reigns' right-hand man and has experienced success because of that and significant character development. So one would think, considering that Hell in a Cell was moved up, considering that it was at the very same event last year that Jey Uso fell in line, why wouldn't it be the same thing for Jimmy Uso? Why wouldn't Jimmy Uso face Reigns for the Universal Championship? Why wouldn't he face him inside Hell in a Cell? And why wouldn't you have the same thing? Eventually Reigns beats him, and eventually Jimmy falls in line, and then eventually you've got the heel version of the bloodline that we're all waiting to see, that we're all eventually going to get towards as well. This pivots to Reigns versus Rey Mysterio. I just don't really get, and that kind of feels rushed. I mean, Hell in a Cell was, a couple of weeks away at this point, and the reason that Rey Mysterio is now going to face Roman Reigns is because Reigns attacked him and his son. It feels a bit forced. Isn't it? And Rey Mysterio, frankly, he's getting quite a few World Championship opportunities by people attacking Dominic. He got it with Brock Lesnar in 2019 at Survivor Series. Now he's getting it now in 2021 with Roman Reigns attacking Dominic as well on SmackDown. It's the same thing. Now, don't get me wrong at all. I have no doubts in my mind at all that this will be a good match. Reigns versus Mysterio, they've really very, very rarely had contact. They've never faced off in singles action as far as I'm aware. I can recall right at the end of Survivor Series, this might be 2013, there was a Survivor Series tag team elimination match, and the last two competitors in the match were Reigns, and I think it was Rey Mysterio, and Reigns hits Mysterio with a spear and wins, and they might have had some form of interaction since, maybe in Royal Rumbles or some stuff like that, but very, very rarely. They've never, as far as I'm aware, had a legit singles match, certainly on this scale, certainly for a World Championship, a Universal Championship. So don't get me wrong, I think the match would be great. Mysterio obviously can still go, and I've mentioned this before, the fact that Mysterio can still go at the level that he can is incredible, frankly, because the guy in the mid to late 2000s, the guy just constantly went down with injuries, especially his knee. How many surgeries he's had on his knee. And when he left WWE initially back in 2013, 2014, the impression was that he was finished. WWE had decided they had gotten everything they could get out of Rey Mysterio in terms of the brand, but most importantly, physically, they thought he's done. He just can't go anymore. He was constantly getting injured, constantly getting hurt, and since he's returned back in 2018, I mean, the guy's revitalized, absolutely revitalized. And I was watching him on SmackDown on Friday, competing in 2 matches. Nothing. This guy can still go. This guy can seriously still go. I know he tore his triceps last year, but you look at him physically, he can still go. The experience he has, and it always makes me laugh when it comes to Rey Mysterio, because this is a guy that WWE has been, outright trying to replace for the best part of 10 years. Maybe, honestly, 10 years. Think of the people they've used to try and replace Rey Mysterio, whether it was Alberto Del Rio, whether it was Sin Cara, whether it's Humberto Carrillo, whether it's Angel Garza, whether it was Andrade. All of these sort of Mexican, Hispanic baby faces and heels that they brought in. Eventually, the plan was for them to replace Rey Mysterio. Kalisto was another example. And don't get me wrong, all of these talents that came in were great, but none of them can replace Rey Mysterio, because I think WWE finally is starting to realize there's only ever one Rey Mysterio. You can't replace this guy. It's not like you can bring in a Latino guy and just be like, okay, he replaces Rey Mysterio. It don't work like that. So after 10 years of trying to replace this guy, they're realizing, well, maybe we should just keep using Rey Mysterio. So don't get me wrong, I'm interested in the match. It's predictable. There is not a chance in a million years that Rey Mysterio leaves as the Universal Championship. I've mentioned before, predictable isn't necessarily a bad thing in this situation. We knew Cesaro wasn't going to beat Roman Reigns at WrestleMania Backlash. The match was still good, though, and I think everyone enjoyed the match, but it's a predictable outcome. We know Rey Mysterio isn't going to win the Universal Championship. In the same vein, Cesaro was never going to win the Universal Championship. And let's face it, if Reigns was facing Jimmy Uso, he wouldn't win the Universal Championship as well. It's just a case of the story was there. The story has been placed for weeks and weeks and weeks at this point, and you thought, again, it would mirror what happened to Jey Uso last year, but they're going in a different direction, which I find slightly odd. You could say, well, maybe they save Reigns versus Jimmy Uso for Money in the Bank. Maybe it has a better reaction in front of live fans. That's a possibility as well. Just surprising, slightly surprising when we heard this news, but again, hasn't officially been confirmed yet, so we'll have to wait and see on this one. Let's move on and talk about Vince McMahon and the Performance Center. And I mentioned about the return to touring, the return of live fans, because it was reported last week that Vince McMahon had instructed the WWE roster to sharpen their in-ring skills at the promotion's Performance Center in Orlando, Florida. This is ahead of WWE's return to live events and shows in July. Now, this was PW Insider reporting this, quote, PW Insider is told that the workouts could begin as early as next week, with talents taking part in drills and perhaps even matches in order to make sure their ring work is sharper. This is believed to be a Vince McMahon edict. The workouts will take place on days that talents aren't booked for TV tapings, according to Mike Johnson, as I mentioned, of PW Insider. Now, according to the latest Wrestling Observer newsletter, some stars on the WWE roster are not happy with Vince McMahon's instruction to do extra training at the Performance Center. It was noted that while superstars living in Orlando don't have any issue with this as they're closer to the Performance Center, it's seen as inconvenient for those living outside as it disrupts their routines. So, look, I mean, to be honest, as far as Vince McMahon edicts goes, I don't know if this is necessarily the worst edict in the world, because let's face it, WWE hasn't been doing these live events. WWE hasn't been doing these live shows for like 18 months. Now, I'm not saying any superstars aren't crisp, and I'm sure that they've been doing drills and they've been doing stuff at the Thunderdome and the Performance Center for the past 18 months or so, but I don't know if this is necessarily the worst thing in the world by Vince McMahon. I think he's just trying to protect his product. Realistically, I understand why some talents might be like, oh, I've got to fly in. Say you live in, I don't know, say you live in Vegas, or say you live outside of Florida, you might like, oh, I've got to fly into Florida on my day off to do drills and, you know, stuff. If I've been in the business for 20 years and I've still got to do this stuff, unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, yes, because frankly, again, if you are returning to the road, you haven't been doing live events in 18 months. I know you've been working regularly on TV, but they might just want to make sure everyone's just on the same playing field, and they might want to make sure that any rust is gone and just build up that callus. Again, I don't know if that's necessarily a problem, because even saying, oh, it's disrupting the routines, well, your routines are going to be disrupted soon anyway, because you're going to be back on the road 4 or 5 days a week. So if anything, I would look at this, if I'm a talent, I would look at this and say, well, I'm going to be on the road 4 or 5 days a week. I might as well just build up those travel miles already, you know, and a bit of extra time in the ring to improve, or to show certain officials or talents that I'm ready. I don't see the issue. I really don't see the issue. I understand, obviously, maybe concerns with the pandemic and all that kind of stuff, but vaccinations are a thing. Also, you're going to have to travel anyway at the moment. That's part of your job now, being a WWE superstar again, since they're returning to the road. So I don't necessarily see, I mean, I understand any disruption's frustrating, but that is the role. That's what you've signed up for here. So I don't really understand that story, frankly. Let's talk about the rumors of a WWE sale. We spoke about this last week, obviously, with the releases and the round of talent cuts over the course of the last few months, and firing lots of office staff and employees at WWE headquarters. There's been lots of discussion about, is WWE selling the company? Now, in an update, Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics says that he's spoken to several investors regarding the WWE sale rumors, and not one of them believe a transaction is on the cards. Thurston tweeted, quote, I talked with 5 people in the WWE investor community in the last 24 hours about the notion that the company's recent actions indicate they're preparing for a sale. Not one of them thought so. Even the stock price is no selling wrestling Twitter. So, I mean, it's interesting that he would say that. I mean, he would know, and I've mentioned this before whenever we've spoken about this here on the channel. I am far from an economic expert. I'm far from a corporate merger or purchase specialist or anything like that. I think it's just, all of this stuff has raised lots of discussions. Some people have said, and I think this is a good point when it comes to these talent cuts and these corporate restructuring situation, is that maybe Nick Khan and these other people that have come in onto the senior leadership team within WWE have looked at the previous presidents and CFOs that were helping Vince McMahon run WWE, George Barrios, etc. Maybe they've come in and they've looked at it and just said, look, the people that were running this company before weren't running it the way they should have. Your roster is way too bloated. You don't need all of these names. You don't need all of these employees in your corporate HQ. The pandemic has changed things. Companies have become far, far more streamlined because of the pandemic. They realize exactly what they need to get the job done and be productive and be profitable and have a higher revenue stream. Maybe WWE is just looking at that. Maybe these new presidents like Nick Khan has just come in and said, look, you don't need all of these talents that you're not using. You don't need all of these corporate staff that we can merge everything together and make more money. Maybe that's it. Now, as far as the investors, would they know if there was a potential sale was coming? By all accounts, nobody knows. And if they were gearing up for a potential sale, frankly, only a very, very select few people would know. And I don't even know if investors would know. You're talking Vince McMahon, again, Nick Khan, maybe Stephanie McMahon, Triple H. I don't know. Again, Kevin Dunn. I mean, how high? It depends how high. Maybe even 2 people. Maybe it's only Vince McMahon and Nick Khan would know. That's what our plan is. The end goal is to sell the company. Who knows? I mean, there can be one person on Twitter, like, Brandon saying there, no, it's not going to happen. I've spoken to investors, but there could be some people on Wall Street that think differently. Now, they're saying that the stock price hasn't really changed because of this. And obviously, once the stock price starts going up or down, that could be an indication of what if a sale is going to happen or not. Ultimately, we just don't know right now. And frankly, when it comes to a WWE sale, I don't think anyone realistically thought, because of these talent cuts and because of these firings in head office, that a sale was going to happen this year. Personally, if a sale is going to happen, that takes a lot of time, a real lot of time. And I mean, people are kind of just saying, well, a sale could happen, but it could be in the next 2 to 3 years or 3 to 5 years or something like that. So who knows? This is going to be a story that rumbles on for a long time, but people are kind of backtracking on it now, which I think is certainly interesting. But it's going to be interesting to see if these cuts continue. Reportedly, they are. And obviously, once these cuts continue, the reports and discussions about a WWE sale are going to continue, which is always going to be interesting on the matter. And I don't think it ends anytime soon. Let's switch to SummerSlam. Of course, SummerSlam we mentioned earlier, talking about the WWE Draft on August 21st, a Saturday SummerSlam in Allegiant Stadium. The first time SummerSlam is being held at an NFL stadium. First time it's being held on a Saturday too. Now, WWE Superstars have expressed their excitement for the event upon the announcement. Now, of course, as we mentioned previously, this is something I do want to touch on because the Manny Pacquiao fight does play into this quite a lot. And we spoke previously about WWE's plans to overcome this, saying that they're going to end SummerSlam at a time that allows fans in attendance and fans watching on at home on box office, etc., the ability to watch both and attend both. As I mentioned, SummerSlam is planned on the same night and time as Manny Pacquiao versus Errol Spence Jr., the fight which will take place at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada, of course. Now, in the latest edition of the Wrestling Observer radio show, Dave Meltzer said he was told that SummerSlam might not be a long show. The plan is to have the show finish just in time for the boxing main event so that fans can walk over to watch that fight, with both shows starting at the same time. The Pacquiao-Spence fight could start at 11 p.m. Eastern time, so the plan is that WWE will end SummerSlam before 11 p.m., possibly around 10:30 or so, to allow the fans to attend both. As for why the show is on a Saturday as opposed to the traditional Sunday, Meltzer noted that Allegiant Stadium always wanted the show to be on a Saturday, though they did not initially know that the Pacquiao-Spence Jr. fight would be on the same night. Now, WWE did have many other options for another venue. However, due to lackluster gate for WrestleMania, WWE wants WrestleMania-like gate for SummerSlam, which is why Las Vegas was chosen for SummerSlam. So, I mean, it's interesting. Again, this whole SummerSlam event is just so atypical, isn't it? WWE have decided that their WrestleMania essentially is taking place in August this year and not in April. They had WrestleMania, obviously, in April at Raymond James Stadium, but it was reduced capacity, limited capacity, and WWE are now looking at the situation as, look, we can have full capacity for Allegiant Stadium, so we're going to do a stadium show. We're going to have, obviously, loads of live fans in attendance. We want it to be a tourist destination, a summer location destination, which is what they've been saying. So that's the plan. And they decided on Vegas, obviously, a while ago. They didn't know about the Pacquiao-Spence Jr. fight. That's kind of thrown a wrench into the situation. As to why it's a Saturday, I'm not complaining over here in the UK whatsoever. More Saturday pay-per-views, please. But for whatever reason, they've decided the Saturday, and now they have to compete with the Pacquiao-Spence Jr. fight. Whether or not WWE can actually end that show, say at 10:30, say at 10:45, remains to be seen. We've seen in the pandemic era of WWE that they can cut these shows short if they want to, but these shows have been taking place inside the Performance Center or the WWE Thunderdome with 0 fans in attendance. When they have a stadium full of people, things go long. WWE shows in stadiums historically go very long, and they don't care about that. If they know they're on this tight schedule, can they stick to it? Time will only tell. It's an interesting situation. It's a fascinating situation, and I think it's a situation that, coming out of SummerSlam, we're going to see the effects either way of, It was an issue when it comes to the Pacquiao-Spence Jr. fight. Oh, it was an issue. It wasn't an issue. If anything, it helped us because we had more fans in attendance that were able to attend the show and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be fascinating. That is going to be fascinating, and it's an issue. It's something that WWE obviously has to try and overcome. Whether or not they can, time will tell, but SummerSlam is ramping up to be ginormous, so I'm very excited for it. Let's talk about Aleister Black. Aleister Black's been doing a lot of streaming since his WWE release, which I know for some reason has annoyed fans on social media, which I just don't understand. I just don't understand at all. He's been doing, as I mentioned, lots of streaming. He previously revealed Easter eggs that he would put in his promos and vignettes, hoping to add layers to his character, which for some reason just really annoyed people, which I just watched the video yesterday. But speaking on the Twitch stream following his release, Black discussed when he felt like himself with the promos and his thoughts on WWE creative. He said, quote, "Money in the Bank with AJ, when I stepped out of the dark and into the dark, that was the first time I did what I wanted to do. I got praised. Don't get mad at our creative. They try their absolute hardest and there are good people working there. I'm very thankful for our creative and I have a good relationship with Bruce Pritchard. He tried to protect me in a lot of situations. He wanted to get me out of the room. The consensus was no one moves like Kim or has his intensity. My style was a hybrid of traditional wrestling and new age striking. In the last 5 years, I've proven to be one of the most influential strikers of this generation and will continue to do that." He said elsewhere on the stream that Vince McMahon praised his creativity. He also offered further details as to his character and release. Look, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to criticize Aleister Black for praising people in WWE. I'm not going to criticize Aleister Black for saying he had a good relationship with Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard and that Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard were really high on him and they liked his creativity. My response to that would be, though, if Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard were these big fans of you and big advocates of the character and Vince McMahon, oh, he loved me, he loved my creativity, he said it to myself and there were plans for me, you wouldn't be released. End of. You would not be released. If Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard truly, truly liked you and truly loved your creativity, you would not be a free agent right now. I just don't understand this rhetoric by Aleister Black. I really don't. I love he's revealing the information about his Easter eggs and the layers to his character and showing his creativity. I think it's great. But these guys, we hear it all the time. We hear it all the time with some of these people that are released by WWE. Vince McMahon said that there were plans, or Vince McMahon said there were long-term plans, or he loved my creativity, or all of my meetings with Vince were great, but he can't control everything, or he can't control all the creative. It's the creative issues, or there's people below him that are trying to hold me back, all this kind of stuff. But they're the same people that say the buck stops with Vince. Vince McMahon has the final call and everything. Why is everyone trying to absolve Vince McMahon of his responsibilities? I just don't understand that. It's like the Good Brothers. When the Good Brothers were released and they blamed Paul Heyman. They blamed Paul Heyman. Oh, Paul Heyman threw us under the bus. He told us there were plans, but then we got released. It's Paul Heyman's fault. Paul Heyman is not the guy that released you. It's Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon has the final call on all of these situations. So I don't understand this when it comes to Aleister Black saying, Vince McMahon said I was really creative and Bruce Pritchard tried to help me. Bruce Pritchard is the head of creative. Vince McMahon is the chairman and CEO of the company. If they both really, really, really wanted to keep you there, you would still be under contract. You would have been on SmackDown on Friday. What are you trying to say? There's a higher power than Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard in the WWE? Or Nick Khan's overthrowing Vince McMahon in there? Of course he isn't. Of course he isn't. If Vince McMahon wants Aleister Black to stay, he will stay. If Bruce Pritchard had all these big creative plans for Aleister Black, he would be on television. The idea of Bruce Pritchard, he went to bat for me so many times. Unless he's getting overpowered by Vince McMahon, which Aleister Black's saying he's not because Vince McMahon was this big fan of him, who's overpowering them both? Nobody. It's this weird... Again, I'm not saying Aleister Black should be going out to bury people and should be blasting Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard, and people do that. But this idea that sometimes these talents come out and say, Vince McMahon, all of my meetings were great, and he was very, if he says, Vince McMahon was very honest to me and said that there were no plans, that's great. But the idea of when they come out and they say, look, Vince McMahon had all of these plans for me, and Bruce Pritchard was constantly pitching ideas for me, he's head of creative. He's pitching ideas to Vince McMahon. So it's either Vince McMahon saying yay or nay to these ideas, and if Aleister Black saying Vince McMahon was a big fan, why is he saying nay, and why is he a free agent right now? I just don't understand that rhetoric. I never understand that rhetoric. It's so bizarre, and I understand people might want to go back to WWE. Maybe that's why they do it. But the idea of they were huge fans of me, but they fired me anyway. Why? Why? That makes no sense. Absolutely no sense whatsoever. Finally, let's talk about NXT Evolve. We've heard loads about NXT Evolve, haven't we? In periods over the course of the last sort of, I guess, 12 months or so. But just over a month or so, this is reported by Fightful Select, their Patreon service. Be sure to check that out and subscribe. Just over a month ago, WWE retaped their NXT Evolve project, but we don't know if that's going to make it to air. This is the report from Fightful Select. They said, quote, Fightful learned that NXT Evolve content didn't come out quite as expected and required a retape. They revealed the details of the Evolve tapings recently, but as of now, the project is not greenlit for a full run and is still in the, quote, proof of concept stage. We're told that the footage was pretty dark, and as to what was able to be viewed, the wrestlers were competing in relative silence. The program will be seen as an answer to AEW Dark to some, but was actually planned well ahead of that. We're told Rinku Singh and Tino Sabatelli were involved in the tapings, which took place the first week of May. Now, as far as NXT Evolve, from what we heard previously, it was going to be NXT for NXT, essentially. It was going to be the new developmental for WWE going forward. And Fightful are reportedly saying it's similar to AEW Dark, which I don't know if that makes it must-see, because hopefully it's not as long as AEW Dark is some weeks. But look, we'll see more. We'll hear more. I think people get excited about these new kinds of projects and products and all that kind of stuff. Lord knows we don't need any more wrestling to watch, but it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. But look, these kind of situations happen all the time. WWE tries things out and then they don't work out, or they decide actually that doesn't work. Remember NXT Kids? Remember that? That lasted maybe a couple of weeks, that kind of thing. It could be the same with NXT Evolve. This looks to be a long-term project, though, so I still think this will happen in the future. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these WWE news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.